been directly involved in asset management for the better part of 10 years now in the water utility sector. I came over from the regulatory side. So that was my real first introduction into the need for a more structured way to implement asset management and life cycle management of assets. Especially having dealt with it on the capital funding side, I was heavily involved in, while I was working for Maryland Department of Environment, the implementation of many large capital stimulus projects at the time. One of the main concerns at the time was the fact that many of the projects that we were doing was really because of poor maintenance that was being executed on a number of large key critical assets. So that really brought my attention to asset management because at the time it was really an emerging business process that was coming out of New Zealand and Australia. And it started to, at that point, start to take early hold in the US. At the time as well, Steve Albee at the EPA, having been directly involved with him, kind of gave me an early introduction to it. And the EPA at the time were really advocating for asset management as a part of their capital sustainability project. So that was really my introduction to it. For the last several years, I've been leading asset management program at WSSC Water. We're a top 10 water wastewater utility. We service the 2 large suburban counties just outside of DC and Maryland. So it's a pretty large operation. And the asset management process has really been a journey. In the early years is really what was about trying to decipher operational asset management from the more traditional sense that North Americans understanding, which is really purely financial. So that was really my journey up to this point. Now I've kind of taken it a little bit more of a broader context, and that's how we interacted, Mike, where I'm really now looking on it as more industry-wide, because what I see is systematic problems that we have, not only in water, but in many infrastructure industries, that we're really kind of beating ourselves against a brick wall because we're just not making the right strategic decisions. And the tools are there with asset management. And really what it takes is just an acceptance of a new way of doing business to create new outcomes.
So one of the things that you've contributed to the ALN is what I hope to be a famous saying from you: structural problems require structural solutions. How did you come to that phrase?
Yeah, that's one thing that we really should understand many times about, when we see systematic problems. Systems are designed to create certain outcomes. So whether that's positive or negative, they're a result of the structure that's underneath. And many times what tends to happen is that we make changes that are responses to symptoms and not responses to the root cause. So in trying to reframe the conversation, I think we need to have a broader and more prescriptive acceptance as to what it takes to achieve a desired outcome. And in many cases, what we need to really look on is that usually we have a legacy of a specific structure that was evolved over time, which we're now living the inequities of it. However, in order for us to make a more equitable outcome, we have to challenge the structure itself and build it to give us exactly the outcomes that we want. It is, as the old adage says, it's the fact that you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different solution. So, it's really shifting that thought process.
Are you able to have that kind of positive impact and share with us any examples from the Washington Suburban Sanitation?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. One of the things that we've been looking on for a while, and when you deal with water, one of the things is that it really gets down to a lot of the inequities that are present within a broader society. So one of the things that we've been actively working on over the last couple of years, and I have to give credit to our Intergovernmental Relation Office for really challenging this, not only within our organization, but larger in the water industry, is looking on broadening the conversation just outside of affordability. One of the issues has always been the fact that we tend to only look on disenfranchised customers or stakeholders as their capability to pay, right? And really what tends to be overlooked is the fact of what we're trying to really advocate for is equity in delivery of service. So one of the things that WSSC has really done well at is really trying to not only reshape the way we engage our communities, but then also make operational changes internally to actually create the outcomes that we need. One example, and I give you kind of two ends of the scale. One example is that a couple of years ago, we were restructuring our rate structure, intentionally doing that, and we keep in context now having this newfound understanding as to how does it actually really affect low income, distressed neighborhoods. But one of the main things that we had to do with that is understanding how we went about the messaging and education campaign that we needed to do for that. One of the structural outcomes of doing that is normally when utilities tend to just engage with key stakeholders that can have a direct regulatory or oversight impact on the decisions that they make. But what we did this time around is the fact that we created a rate calculator tool, which was designed to engage the community pre-rollout of this new rate structure in terms of you can go on, you could put in all your information, and you could figure out exactly how does it affect you in terms of your usage patterns and what you could expect out of your bill going forward. That at the time was something that was not done in any other water utility, and it was a great success for us in terms of going forward. But it really reshapes and reframes your understanding as to who are the stakeholders. And that's another thing that, as you probably know, Michael, one of the main things that ISO 55000 really hits on is understanding and shaping and giving the right priority to stakeholders and reframing the understanding of that.
So that's, let me see if I understand it right. So if I was a large company in your district and I filled out the form and I didn't deserve any credits or breaks, then I would pay the regular rate. But if I was a individual in a disadvantaged neighborhood and I filled out, then my rate would be adjusted differently.
Well, not necessarily that. What it was really was the fact that we opened up the ability for you to get information. So instead of you accessing what would be, a change in your rate structure on your first bill, we gave you the opportunity to come in proactively very early while we were in the approval and lobbying process for you to understand exactly how would this affect you, thereby enabling the advocacy power of many of these, distressed areas or customers to properly engage with how it may affect them.
Excellent. So to rephrase it, if I was a large company, I might know what you're doing and might have representation in your board,
Exactly.
or whatever, and understand how it's going to be impacting me.
Yes.
You made it easier for those who don't have the privilege of being engaged or entrenched with you to understand the impacts. And then the advocacy groups could say, wait, here's a section of people that actually need special attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a key intentional thing that you have to do organizationally. And again, I have to give credit to Karen Riley and to Kristen Knight-Lee, who Karen runs our intergovernmental relations operation. She's the director of that office. And Kristen Knight-Lee runs our customer service operation, both of who were were big champions of making sure that we were properly recognizing all stakeholders, which included customers who may not have great advocacy power, but would be significantly affected if we weren't able to allow them to give context to the changes that we were making.
Are there any examples of how this affected or improved the level of service to these people?
Well, I think it's level of service in terms of understanding customer engagement, right?
Okay.
Because in many cases, what you do is that you open up additional avenues to engage with the utility, right? And to have the proper context. Because one of the things that's always, and it's really the major disconnect when we talk about equity in infrastructure, is the fact of infrastructure by itself, being technical, requiring a lot of data and understanding, requires a certain level of advocacy if you don't create an intentional avenue to engage with everyone. So in that sense, normally it's tilted towards those who have the capability to have the resources to properly decipher and understand how to interpret the changes or the impacts that these things will make. So by creating that, he created a level of service understanding and a change in the level of service, which then spurred other things as well. What that has done as well is that we're now engaging with national organizations to further advocate for this to not only be something that we at WSSC do, but the industry at large that is done for that. One of the missing facts is that most people wouldn't understand right now is the fact that when you have a lot of this supplemental support coming down, even from the federal government going down, a lot of times it's not necessarily even the context of understanding that people need help with their utility bills. Most times is lost because a lot of time the conversation is dominated by energy. And for many of those, they're private. So normally they don't want to engage with subsidizing that. But 80% of your water utilities are government owned, right? So to channel that relief, and water is an essential thing for all of that to happen. And I think everybody now also understands the effect of making sure that you are not only operationally, but strategically understanding how you affect your most vulnerable customers is quite, the major contrast that we have now, especially after Flint.
Another thing that you've said that I think is very powerful is that we are receiving the intended outcomes that we've planned.
Yes.
People look at the problems we're having and say, what? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure, and really, it is a fact of we need to relearn what are the actual causes of our problems. In the infrastructure industry, quite frankly, it was not absolved of many of the structural disenfranchisement that many minority communities and depressed communities actually face. If we look on everything from transportation to water to everything else, there were actual structural decisions that were made, from redlining to where we place our highways, to where we put our water treatment plants, to where we have our refuse disposal, to everything like that. All of those were actual code and strategic decisions and structural systems that were put in place for a specific outcome. The problem has been this. The problem has been that in almost every criteria, what we've done is the fact that we've kept those structures as we have advanced socially and economically. But we're expecting more with a system that was designed to only have pockets of flourishment, right? So the issue is, and we try to advocate for this all the time, is the fact that one community that may be more privileged may be arguing against having more investment happen in a certain part of town, but they don't understand that the water that reaches to their community actually has to travel through that neighborhood, right? And the water that leaves the plant or goes to the wastewater treatment plant is pretty much servicing everyone, right? That's the one thing that we can understand. Water is clear for a reason. It does not recognize zip code in terms of what you need to do. However, if you do not intentionally manage it in that frame of reference, you can have that inequity be perpetuated, right? So historically, we have a lot of structural issues that we need to fix, a lot of even our urban sprawl and growth. People don't understand that most of our cities, we put highways directly down the center of the city to ensure that we separated a certain part of town from the other part of town. You're literally sitting in traffic because of a decision that was made structurally to perpetuate racial disparities, right? What we have not done over time is that we haven't reimagined or restructured the way that we support or what changes need to be made, right? So we carry on the legacy of what were poor decisions, right? And one of the things that we're trying to reframe is the fact that diversity actually promotes higher efficiency and outcomes, right? Yes. If you build your city to have an equitable level of service delivery for all, your city is far more capable of growth versus you having only one part of town that's designed for prosperity and another part of town that's depressed. But you still have to service that because at some point, that area of need becomes a threat to your prosperity. So it makes sense to have it being equal.
Yes. So that brings us to the ALN initiative of advancing equity with asset leadership. So you have been a member of that. We've got a number of other people who are preparing this paper for the transition team, the Biden-Harris transition team, which is focused on a more diverse approach to problems.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the initiative and what you think might come out of it?
Sure. One of the things that is necessary is advocacy at the appropriate points in time. And we see that right now it is the window of, there's a window of opportunity to leverage what are expected changes to deliver on some of the promises that were made. So I was very encouraged to be a part of this project that brought together, several people to engage with providing the proper context to the transition team as to what changes actually need to be made, and the fact that the context of change should be something that is structural and intentional in its outcome. So the diversity in experience, I think, by pulling together so many different skill sets from all facets of infrastructure support has been very good, because it has allowed for a lot of diverse thought in solutions. And I think that what we're producing is really a broad context, but very focused in its intent in terms of making an impression on the transition team to go beyond the surface and actually look at making the structural changes that are necessary to create the outcomes that are expected.
And the paper states that you see ISO 55000 as being part of the structural reconstruction.
Yes.
Can you explain how you see that?
Yeah, I mean, intentionally, the fact about it is that it goes back to systems are designed to create outcomes that they perpetuate. ISO 55000 offers what I would think is a restructuring of most of our infrastructure support organizations in a way that intentionally aligns the focal points to get a change in outcome. ISO 55000, because of its great focus on efficiency, asset lifecycle maximization, but also appropriate stakeholder engagement and interest points along that point, has been proven in many parts of the world as to be, at least at this point, the most efficient model that we can implement. So if we want to accept a lot of the successes that have been done, in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand and many other places which have been rapidly adopting this. And one thing to note is the fact that you have several major private organizations who are heavily interested in maximizing profit, engaging and leveraging even further ISO 55000, right? The US military has understood that this is a very useful tool in terms of allowing them to move beyond what is the legacy of management to adopting a strategic and operational model that allows them to have a new way of thinking, but also to focus on what's the most important thing: the delivery of level of service at your lowest risk, at your most optimal cost, right? It is pretty much almost the holy grail of what you would consider to be infrastructure management, having the mixture of all three to make sure that you're really hitting all your targets, because we have restrictions, but in order to do that, you actually have to have the proper tool.
And you are part of the first class of our diversity scholarship awardees for our A55K Professional Certification. I believe the course wrapped up today and
Yes.
exams are tomorrow. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned from the course?
Yeah, I mean, the course was very valuable. It was compressed, but a very good deep dive into ISO 55000 and the process of certification leading up to being prepared to take the certification and become certified. It's a very enriching course, and it's really offered a lot of value back. Even myself being intimately involved in asset management for so many years and having the operational knowledge, it was a lot of additional detail that was given to me to help to not only hone my skills, but to offer greater insight into how I can improve and leverage a lot of the ISO 55000 best practices on my current operation.
Do you anticipate anything, or can you share anything that you're thinking regarding that?
Well, I mean, definitely what it is always good to really implement and leverage a lot of the what has been battle tested elsewhere, right? And I think what ISO 55000 does is that it not only has a validating structure, that it is peer reviewed and implemented on a large scale, both public and private, that it allows you to have a greater level of certainty when you're coming in to make strategic and other recommendations to your organization in terms of what you'll do differently. So having been armed with a lot of this information, it is my intent to really try to see how we can maximize and leverage some of these. And quite frankly, one of the things that I intend to do, at least on the industry level, is really to look on how do we engage from a broader industry level, looking on how can we actually get ISO 55000 as being a medium to long-term target for at least large water utilities to adopt.
So not just your own, but bringing this to, is it the IWA?
Yeah, so I mean, that's something that we definitely can advocate for with WEF Water, the Water Environment Foundation, the AWWA, and many of these other organizations who are very vested in asset management. But one of the things that we've seen has been the challenge for asset management is that it is a space that without ISO 55000 is not very well defined. You know, it is based on a lot of what is, yes, tried and accepted knowledge, but we have a plethora of organizations that have really been jockeying for prominence in terms of who necessarily has credibility in terms of having a proven solution to implement asset management. I think ISO offers that on a global scale where in many cases, that is what needs to be leveraged to offer a path forward.
Excellent. So we'll take you up on that, and we'll be approaching those organizations together and see how the ALN can help their members learn more about the perspective that you're sharing with us right now.
Sure.
So questions are starting to come in, and let's start with this one. If you had one wish regarding asset management and advancing equity, what would it be?
Well, the one thing I would hope is that at least I would hope that from a federal to state down to a local level, what we would start doing is to actually create a metric to understand the outcome of equity in capital dollars spent, right? Most of the evaluation that we do on projects when we spend money, it never really takes into context in terms of, is it improving the overall level of service for disenfranchised neighborhoods or historically depressed parts of our society in terms of what improvement do they get? I think by creating a metric to really leverage that understanding, just as we do where we're saying, okay, we want to achieve a certain, LEED standard, is LEED platinum, LEED gold, LEED whatever. If we could do that where we could have actual, a metric of measure that shows us the return on equity for capital dollars spent, I think that would go a far way in not only creating awareness, but also advocating for real outcomes.
That would be a really powerful program for the ALN to help get out there, some type of a calculator, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. We have to, you have, as the old saying goes, you measure what you want to change.
Yeah, excellent. Jim Dieter, I hope you're taking note of that, because I think we've got an initiative in 2021. We've got another question from one of my BIM buddies from way back. Hi, Igor Starkov. Do you have plans to create digital twins for your assets?
So digital twin, yes, is a long-term strategic target for our organization. But most people who understand digital twin understand that the infrastructure development and investment that it takes to get to that level is pretty significant, right? Also in context of the fact that during a pandemic right now, access to capital and operating budget shortfalls have significantly affected utilities. So I think our path has been altered, but it's still a long-term target for us in terms of the utility of the future. And that's something we definitely hope to engage with when the appropriate strategic opportunity presents itself.
Excellent. And then there was, I had mentioned that you were a NASA researcher, and somebody wants to know what did you do at NASA?
So pretty interesting. So I'm an alum of Howard University in DC, and it's funny because when I was doing my master's in environmental engineering, one of my professors approached me he said, I have a project that I want you to be involved in. It's pretty cool, but I have to make sure you're interested. The project that I worked on was basically at the time was in the early development of the Mars Shuttle project. And one of the major challenges, if people don't understand, is that the heaviest commodity to travel to space is water, right? So in order to do that, we had to work on creating a miniaturized, complete water distribution and recycling system. The fellowship I was offered, I was integrally working on, was an advanced bioreaction reactor that we could utilize to pretty much recycle the waste on the shuttle to then create a gray water and finished water recycling loop going back. So sounds glamorous, but it didn't smell glamorous. Let's put it that way.
But I think probably the miniaturation part prepared you for having to deal with real world problems on Earth.
Oh yeah, definitely, no question. Out of that research came a lot of what at the time turned into advanced bioreactor technology that's implemented in wastewater treatment plants right now. We were working in partnership with Purdue University, the University of South Florida, and many others, that NASA was pretty much kind of breaking off pieces of the treatment system for everyone to work on. So it was a very enriching experience.
Excellent. Well, this has been a very enriching conversation, and 30 minutes goes by just like that, but we'd like to thank you for taking time. I know you're really busy right now. And I'd like to again thank our sponsors on this, our final Thursday at 4 of 2020. We will be having a holiday party next week, a Zoom holiday party for people interested. Go ahead and email me if you're interested in that. And once again, Hugh, thank you for your time here and for the inspiration you're providing the ALN and the Advancing Equity with Asset Leadership Committee. We've decided to actually call it a committee.
Wow, thank you. I really appreciate not only the opportunity to participate, but also the opportunity to extend a message. I often think of what I've adopted as one of, my personal points of reference, which is an old Japanese proverb that says that vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare. Right. So if you think of it in terms of that sense, there's a lot of work that each of us can do to help to realize creating the synergy between action and vision, and hope that we can achieve the changes that we all see.
I think that's a perfect way to end the 2020 ALN Thursday at 4 series. Thank you so much, Hugh, and thanks to all of our attendees. Have a great 2021.